Hello, I'm Atreides and welcome to AVE Maria section in this history modding panel. In this video, we'll explore how we handle the topic of history in our Crusader Kings 3 modding. We will start with a few definitions and a brief overview on how history intersects with video games in general. Then, in the second part, we will see the specificities of Crusader Kings 3 and its portrayal of the Middle Ages and how it can have issues. Finally, we will explore how modding and AVE Maria tries to solve some of those issues. In this first section, we need to start with a few definitions. You probably have encountered the words historical accuracy and historical in a lot of video game discussions and mod names. But what do they mean in our context? History is the academic historical discipline producing narratives of the past from primary, secondary sources, archaeology, and various material evidence. Accuracy and authenticity for historical scholarships means that the work produced is truthful to the information and sources available. There are methods to ensure that the available information, its interpretation, and the conclusions presented can be checked and, if necessary, verified. That is why scholarship has footnotes, a bibliography, and a source index. To have to cite your sources is what ensures accuracy for academic historians. Video games, on the other hand, are cultural works of fiction, and are usually far remote from the historical discipline and the historical method, despite often being marketed as historical. They do not have to adhere to citable sources. By definition, a video game is free to pursue stories that cannot be found in the historical record, expand upon them, or go in avenues and directions that historical scholarship cannot. And that's what makes them interesting. Accuracy and authenticity for works of fiction, and in our case, video games, mean giving the player the feel of the historical period they are trying to depict, the frame of mind and contingencies of the historical actors they are trying to portray. It does not mean representing all the nitty-gritty details like the numbers of buttons on a coat for a soldier, but more the key contingencies of a period. However, even if the past is by definition elusive, video games have trouble being authentic and accurate as we just defined. For a number of reasons, and usually commercial reasons, historical video games are more or less painting preconceived notions about the history of a period than anything else. That's not to say that video games are bad, or to say that the video game medium is not a useful tool to teach history. Merely that most actual games are not up to par, despite being a good introduction to history to a wider audience. Besides, game imperfection can also be used to teach interesting facts and narratives by history professors. As a video game, Crusader Kings 3 is no exempt in that regard. While it is succeeding in crafting gameplay elements that are contextually relevant for the Middle Ages, like the personal nature of rulership, non-unitary states, or the fragmentation of power structures, the game is still falling short in giving an accurate representation of the context of the period, and usually goes into something specific about the portrayal of the Middle Ages in works of fiction. Medievalism. What is medievalism? In short, it is the creative interpretation or recreation of the European Middle Ages. Medievalism had a major presence in the cultural memory of modern North America and Europe, and has grown to become a global phenomenon. In the last 2 decades alone, there has been many popular manifestations of medievalism works, such as Harry Potter books and films, Game of Thrones, Marco Polo, The Last Kingdom, Disenchantment, the Lord of the Rings movies, or even the board game Carcassonne. Attempting to summarize medievalism in its entirety is a challenging task for a number of reasons, and we'll not try to do so here. But what is important in our context is that Crusader Kings 3, through its aesthetics, artwork, and mechanics, participates in recreating a certain vision of the Middle Ages. A vision that borrows from quasi-medieval context and tropes that are quite distant to what an academic medievalist might understand as the Middle Ages. In a 1973 seminal article, Dreaming of the Middle Ages, Umberto Eco, the famous Italian medievalist, set to explore the renewed interest for the period in our popular culture. He proposed 10 little Middle Ages, which are 10 various ways that work of fiction project contemporary biases, anxieties, and desires into the past. One of those, the barbaric age medievalism, the shaggy medievalism, dirty and violent, is the Dark Ages, that can easily be found in the 867 start date, full of violent Viking raiders and berserkers, and civilized political entities where you are in a constant danger of being conquered by your neighbor. But in the game, we can also find elements of the Romanticism Middle Ages, with some lighter elements such as the in-game romance options or even the game concept of knights. Even medieval dreams of traditions, like the decisions towards avenging the Battle of Tours, can be found in the game. All in all, several elements of medieval tropes can be found scattered around the game. So, all in all, even if vanilla Crusader Kings 3, despite incorporating elements that are useful to understand the social structures of the time, and in that regard being accurate, equally projects tropes and myths that are far remote from what we know of the Middle Ages through historical scholarship. With all that said, where do we go from here, and what can modding do to alleviate the situation? Well, I am sure you can guess where this is going. AVE MARIA is founded on the objective of trying to mod the aesthetics and mechanics of the game to better fit what we know of the Middle Ages from actual academic research. To use historical method to translate academic research into game content. We want to put the player in all of the contextual realities that were contingent to the characters you are playing. In order to realize our objective, the best solution is, of course, to have a good foundation and a solid knowledge of the period and of the societies we want to focus on. This knowledge is gathered either through personal studies, for instance, Scarecrow, who is now working as a content designer for CK3 since earlier this year, has done a PhD thesis examining the connection between politics, administration, and identity in Byzantium, and has provided tremendous value to the mod. Several other academic researchers have provided direct input that helped craft several of the mod mechanics. Our other developers, who have now followed a professional academic path, have acquired a knowledge of the period through extensive readings of a large body of secondary sources, from general books to obscure research articles. But unlike our comrades at Cultural Flavor Project or Extended Portraits and Ethnicities, who are more focused on the physical and visual interpretation of past material culture, the choice was made to focus first on the mechanics of governments for several key political entities of the time. The Roman empires, known in vanilla as the Byzantines, the Islamic empires, and finally Western Europe. All of this in order to break the vanilla blanket uniform government system put in place for most of the depicted world. The sources we use are usually the one related to game characters, the aristocrats. An article about theft and criminality in 11th century Constantinople is interesting and all, but rather remote from the focus of the game. That's why we're mostly using secondary sources related to political history or history of institutions. At the end of the day, the objective is to identify some key contextual elements of rulerships for the aristocrats of the time and fit that in game mechanics. Of course, there are unavoidable core things that cannot be changed through modding, but it is our hope and objective to do as much as is possible with the modding tools available to us in order to better represent the realities of the exercise of power and daily life for the aristocrats of the different political entities of the time. In addition to the mechanical changes we are doing on government, the objective is also to enrich and liven the player's experience through events taken directly from primary sources. Social history and microhistory books would be used in those cases, but primary sources are also a perfect choice for this. A lot of the new events for Roman characters are taken directly from the Book of Ceremonies, a 10th century manuscript commissioned by Emperor Constantine VII, describing the protocols relevant to the various events regulating the life of the emperors in the court. Similarly, some upcoming new Fatimid events are crafted directly from translation of the original Fatimid Caliph Khutbah festival Friday sermons. To summarize, AVE Maria's objective is to use academic research to mod Crusader Kings 3 with more contextually accurate mechanics and events as is humanly possible within the limits of engine, modding and gameplay.